John chapter 1, he has a purpose of making sure that we believe and that we know what we believe and that in believing we might have life. That's going to be the main theme of his gospel is believe, right? And so just as we go through, and I have no idea, by the way, how long John's going to take us. Like it's 20-something chapters, and I usually get through a chapter a week, but I'm spending two on the Christmas story. So we could be in the book of John for a while. I just want you to see that his main purpose for writing, he tells us. He wants us to believe. And so his gospel is a testament about who Jesus is and why he came. He wants us to believe, and in believing, we'll have true life. And that's what we're going for. Not the kind of life that the world seeks after, but true life, which is abundance. You know, Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but Jesus comes so that we could have life to the abundance, and that's the purpose. And we encounter that life by believing in Jesus. And so open up to John chapter 1. Hopefully you're there. And before I start reading, I'm pointing out that we are in the Christmas season, and so it worked out perfect that we're going through these verses because they're Christmas verses, right? They actually start before Christmas, but they're Christmas verses because they're telling us something about Jesus. And who Jesus is and why he came is kind of an important thing. Every year we celebrate this kind of thing. In fact, I was leaving this church today, and I was driving to the bank, and on our way there, we passed by a cemetery, and I looked over, and there was a family placing a Christmas tree next to one of the graves. And I thought, that's so sweet. And my son Isaiah was like, why? That was his question. I said, it's sweet, and he said, I don't understand why. And I said, it's because Christmas is a symbol of hope. And what better place for a Christmas tree than next to a grave of a loved one, that there's hope in something better, right? And so they placed this Christmas tree there. We saw that Christmas is a symbol of hope as we went through the pandemic in the last few years. Right around March is when the COVID pandemic started. And I don't know if you remember this. It was big on my Facebook feed. A lot of people began to put back up Christmas trees and redecorate their house for Christmas. Well, because they're at home and they're bored and they can't go out anyway, they're going to put up Christmas trees. In fact, my wife, but you would probably believe it, wanted to decorate for Christmas. And I talked her out of that one. I'm like, no, it's March. But people were putting up Christmas trees because they were supposed to stay home. And so they wanted to put up a symbol of hope inside of their house that we're going to get through it. Now, I'm sure some of them did it because they were bored, but there were a lot of people who did this because they understood the Christmas tree is a symbol of hope to a world that sometimes feels hopeless, right? And so they began to put up Christmas trees, and it's a testament to who Jesus is, because if the world around us understands this symbol, then it speaks to the reality of that, right? Who Jesus is matters so much that when people feel helpless, they put up a Christmas tree to remind them there's still something better. When who Jesus is matters so much that when a family has lost a loved one, they'll still show up and put a Christmas tree next to their graveside. Like, that's how important Jesus is and Christmas is to us. And we really have to question why. That's why John writes his book. He wants you to know who Jesus is, and he wants you to believe in Jesus. And in believing in Jesus, you'll have an abundant life. That's his idea, right? So that's where we're going. Who is Jesus? And if you look at John chapter 1, I'm just going to read the first 8 verses, and we're going to kind of go through them again. It says this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning the light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. That's as far as we're getting. This is the prologue of John. It's a little different than the rest of the book. And there are some people believe that this is part of a poem that kind of fits together, and you can see the whole poem if you look at where the references to John is, because the beginning part of John chapter 1 will start out with a few poetic words and then talk about John, and then another few poetic words, and then guess who it talks about again? John. And not the John that wrote the book, but John the Baptist, who was the forerunner of Jesus, who came to testify about the light. But John, in this poem or in the prologue, tells us something about Jesus that really helps us to understand why people will put Christmas trees up in a graveyard, while people will put them back up when they feel hopeless. John tells us something about Jesus, and what he tells us is that Jesus is the eternal Word. That's my first point, if you're looking for points. Jesus is the eternal Word. Look at how he says it. It's like he smashes it together between two statements that talk about the beginning. He says this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, right? So the two things that it's like a sandwich. You have in the beginning at the beginning part of that text, and then you have he was with God at the beginning in verse 2. Do you see the sandwich? And then there's all this stuff in between about him being the Word and with God and God. And so we have to go back to find out who Jesus is. And no matter what memory you go back to, you got to go back further. Maybe you could go back to the beginning, but guess what? You have to go back further, because Jesus is the eternal Word, right? He's the eternal Word. See, what makes Christians different and special in our culture is that we believe in a God that created the heavens and the earth. He spoke life into existence. And when John wrote, in the beginning was the Word, it's an echo of Genesis chapter 1. And what you would expect for him to say next is, in the beginning was God, and God created the heavens and the earth. But that's not what he says. He says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Well, where was he before that? Well, he was with God. Was he ever created? No. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God in the beginning. He's eternal before that. In Revelation, John says he's the beginning, right? He was, and he's the middle, he is, and then he is to come, right? He's eternal. As Christians, we believe, and Hebrews chapter 11, verse 3 testifies about this, and you can read it with me. It talks about us and our faith and what we believe about God. Hebrews 11, verse 3, if my pages are not put together. It says this: by faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was made out of what was not visible, or what was visible. The important thing about this is to understand that as Christians, the beginning of our faith, of our belief, starts with faith. By faith, we believe that the heavens and earth were created by God's command. By the way, this statement is true about no matter what you believe about the origins of the earth, right? Because nobody was there to witness it. So whatever scientist or university you want to go to, they have to start with this same premise. By faith, I believe this. By faith, I believe that. Unless you were actually there to see it, you really can't witness it. Thank you. And so the point is, as Christians, it's by faith that we believe that God used a command to create the heavens and the earth. You see, he used his words. And doesn't that sound like what John talks about? In the beginning was the Word. And that's how God created. See, we believe in something that is beyond nature, and that's important because our world is so focused on nature that its entire emotional system is made up of how they feel in the moment, instead of realizing that there's a God that transcends that moment, right? And so we have to recognize about Jesus is that he's the eternal Word. He was in the beginning was the Word. He just was. He's outside of it. He wasn't created. He just was. What was Jesus doing with God in the beginning? He was hanging out with him. Kind of like you all show up here today, like you're all together, right? You're with each other. So we understand this about Jesus so far, I hope. He was in the beginning, right? He wasn't created in the beginning. He was in the beginning. Look, again, we got to move quickly because I'm just keep rambling here, I think. But John chapter 1, look at how many times he says was. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? Like, he just was. That's it. He's the eternal Word. And then it says something about him and his nature. He was with God. That word with, it describes fellowship. He was together. But it says something else about his nature too. It says he was God. So not only was he with God, but he was also God. And that idea has been so complicated, and John seems to put it so simple, right? And today we come up with all kinds of metaphors, like how does this work? And we say, oh, it's something like water. You've got water, which is just H2O. It could be a solid, it could be liquid, it could be a vapor, but it's still just water. And we come up with all these complicated ideas of how to explain the Trinity, but the truth is, it just was, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is the kind of thing that got Jesus in a lot of trouble, by the way. Like when people got angry with him and wanted to put him to death, it was because what he claimed about himself. What he claimed about himself is that he was God. See, in John chapter 10, you can see this happening. Jesus is talking to he's talking to some of the religious people in John chapter 10, verse 30, and he says this. Verse 30, he says, I and the Father are one, right? That's his statement. I and the Father are one. And it said again, his Jewish opponents picked up stones to stone him. But Jesus said to them, I have shown you many good works from the Father. Which one of these do you stone me for? We are not stoning you for any good work, they replied, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. You see that? Like, they got it. They didn't like it, but they understood what Jesus was claiming. They understood what John is the claim that John is making. When we come together to celebrate Jesus and who he is on Christmas, the person we're celebrating is God in the flesh. He just pre-existed. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's the child that we believe was born. It's the reason that it makes such a large impact on us. I'm going to keep moving before I spend all my time on just 2 verses. Here's what he goes on to say in verse 3. My second point, by the way, is that Jesus is the revelation of life. And here's what he goes on to say. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. This is like dad talk here. My kids always get mad at me for repeating myself, right? They say that I do it too much. And partly because I spend a lot of time like teaching, whether doing it at the church or doing it as a substitute. I spend a lot of time teaching. I find I have to repeat myself. So I find creative ways to do it. I'll say something in a positive way, and then I'll just say it in a negative way, right? But I'm saying the same thing. And John does that. He says, through him all things were made. Without him, nothing has been made that has been made. It's the same thing, one positive, one negative. It's like saying Jesus is the one who's responsible for creating the mountains and the air that we breathe. And without Jesus, you wouldn't have mountains or air to breathe. Right? It's the same thing. The point is that this Word that was with God in the beginning is the one that's responsible for creating everything. He's made everything. And it brings us back again to that Genesis story where God created the heavens and the earth. And he said, let there be light. And there was light. And that went on for 6 days. And then he rests. And then what do you know it? On day 6, man messes it up. Right? Like, who knows what day that actually was, by the way. But man messes it up. God created the world to be light. And now it's darkness. God created the world so that he could have life. And sin came in and it brought death. This word is a word of revelation because, like, if you look at what it says in Romans, it says that through creation, like, is a testimony to God that he's revealed himself to the world in the things that he's made. See, that light is revelation, and Jesus is the light. He's the one who created everything, and that one who created everything is stepping back into creation to bring it back to life. It's why we put Christmas trees on up. because Jesus is, in the beginning, he was God, and he was with God, and he is God, and without him, nothing was made that is made. This is a pretty important person, right? He changes the world. He recreates what we destroyed. In verse 4, it says, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. Right? Because he's the Word. He created life. He created life for all mankind, but this is the sad part, verse 5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. Does not understand it. Does not comprehend it. I don't know how your translation puts it. The word that's used there can mean all of those things. Understand, overcome, comprehend. The point is that this light that was with God in the beginning, which we know is Jesus, shines. And look at it, it's present tense. It's not what he did in the past, it's what he's doing now. See, in the past, he was with God in the beginning. In the past, he was God. Those are all, and he still is those things, but it's all past tense. But here, it's the light that shines in the darkness. And the darkness does not overcome it. I had a conversation this week with somebody, and it was all darkness. Like the person was just so focused on all the wrongs of the world, like everything is corrupt. Yep, I agree. Humanity is hostile. Yeah, still agree. Culture is bad. Yeah, you're right. But there hasn't been a culture before that hasn't been bad, right? Like this is all just true. And he was so focused on the darkness. I had to remind him, the darkness isn't going to overpower the light. The darkness won't understand the light, and the world doesn't understand the light. That's true. I mean, we live in a world today that's always natural focused. It's everything that exists has to exist within nature, and that's the only explanation they come up with. And because they can't understand something that's outside the bonds of nature, then they can't understand who Jesus is. Because Jesus is outside of nature. He was God in the beginning, right? And so we have to remember that he's outside of all that. And the world doesn't understand it. That's okay. It doesn't have to, like we should be a testament to the light, but we also have to understand there's going to be people that don't get it. They don't comprehend it. They don't see it, but they'll never overcome it. Christians should remember this because they fight as if they're losing. We're not. We never will. Right? Because the one that we have that's shining was with God in the very beginning. He was God. So this idea is that Jesus is the revelation of life, because that's what light does. We talk about light being good and evil, but ultimately light reveals things. And when Jesus steps into the world, he is an expression of who God is, his very character, his nature, all embodied in this one person. So do you want to know who Jesus is? He's the exact representation of God. That's the one that we look to when we want to see how God feels about something and God's heart and his character. Right? He gets angry. He gets angry with people who should have known better, religious leaders. And then he goes out and loves the world that is kind of lost. It's such an interesting thing that Jesus has going on, right? He gets angry at people who he would think that he would be happy with, all those religious people that spent their life trying to do everything perfectly. And then he shows compassion for the sinners. That's something about God, because when God's character is described, more often than not in the Hebrew Scriptures, it says God is abounding in love and full of compassion. And we see that in the person of Jesus, right? And that's important because Jesus is a light of revelation to God's character. He shows us what it is to have real life. That's important. The last part, my last point too, is that God sends witnesses. And this is the kind of break in the poem where he talks about John the Baptist. And it says, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning the light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. I just want to point out this John is not the same John who writes the book. This is John the Baptist, who's going to be the first person to really go out and testify about the coming kingdom. He's a witness of the light, kind of like those angels that came to pronounce Jesus' birth. That's John the Baptist is right there with them. He's an important character because God sent him to testify about the light. He himself was not the light, just someone who showed or was a lamp. That's what Jesus calls him, a lamp to the light. And you can see John talking about this in John chapter 1, verse 33. And you can just turn your Bible or you can see it up on the screen. Here's what it says. The next day, this is verse 33. And I myself did not know him, but the one who sent me to baptize with water told me, the man on whom you see the Spirit come down and remain is the one who will baptize with the Holy Spirit. So John himself is the one that says God sent him to do this. And what was he sent to do? He was sent to witness about the light. He himself not the light, he's just a witness of the light. But I think John was just the first of many that came after. And the example that we're supposed to follow, right? Because see, here's the difference between how the world celebrates Christmas and how we should celebrate Christmas. See, the world celebrates Christmas as if it's just a great day. We understand that it represents that light of revelation, the one who was in the beginning was with God, and in the beginning was God, becoming flesh and dwelling with us. We understand, because we know the rest of the story, that we celebrate that day because not only did God become flesh, which is amazing enough, but he also became a servant, taking on the sins of humanity. That's pretty impressive. That's a reason to celebrate. And I know that there is so much going on in Christmas. But if this isn't the top thing, you're missing the point. This has to be who Jesus is the most important part of Christmas. And then understanding who Jesus is should send you out like John to be a light to the world. And what better time to be a light than when the rest of the world's putting up Christmas trees? We could tell them about the reason we put up Christmas trees. Anyway, if you are looking for a church home or a family to be part of, we'd invite you to come forward. If you need somebody to pray with you, we'd invite you to come forward. And just as we go through this next month, remember that Jesus is God incarnate.